On this third Sunday of Eastertide, I'd like to speak to us about the story continued. Way back in the 1940s, my mother and a friend attended a national convention out in Cleveland. There were 10,000 people. They gathered together one evening to listen to the famous lyric tenor Roland Hayes. I don't know if anybody here remembers that name. I don't. I wasn't born yet. But my mother attended the concert. Following his performance, the applause brought him back to the stage for 3 encores and then a fourth. And the appreciative audience this time was hoping he would sing Old Man River, one of their favorites. He slowly stepped to the podium, and then, that's all for today. To be continued next time. How to get in trouble at the beginning of a sermon. Begin a story, get someone interested, and then not to finish it. Well, don't you hate those TV programs that lead you right up to the edge of a cliff of suspense, and then the words flash across the screen to be continued? You're frustrated, you're disappointed. Not only that, there's no guarantee you'll be watching TV the next week, so you might miss it altogether. I feel like writing the producer when that happens. Unlike our disappointment with a program that ends without an ending and instead displays the message to be continued, the exact reverse is true about Easter. When Jesus walked the earth, there came many forces against him, determined to silence, put an end to his life and his story. But the events of Easter morning proclaimed that it was, to everyone's surprise, a story to be continued. That the life and story of Jesus did not become silent at the end of the crucifixion. In fact, that is why the cross on our sanctuary's front wall is empty, so that we're reminded of victory and not death. Victory, not defeat. Life. Freedom from the powers that put Jesus on the cross, rather than shackles and fear and evil and sin and nails. There were plenty who wanted to end the story and hear no more from Jesus about his ideas. Well before his arrest, Jesus encountered authorities trying to embarrass him publicly, intimidate him with threats, and trap him with clever questions that might yield answers that would justify their arresting him. The local Roman ruler, Pilate, unable to find a convincing case against Jesus, was willing to silence the issue by symbolically washing his hands of the whole matter and giving him over to the mob that was shouting, "Crucify him." To dispel early rumors that Jesus had risen to life just days after his death, we find recorded in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 28, verse 11 and following, that the Roman guards at the tomb were bribed to spread the rumor that Jesus' followers had stolen his body while the guards were dozing. Now, does that remind you of conspiracy theories of today designed to overlook the facts in order to serve one's own personal agenda? As clever, subversive, and disruptive as a rumor like that might be, it could not stand up against the many sightings and meetings of people with Jesus that followed. It wasn't long before there were many witnesses in that ancient world to the fact that Jesus was alive, that the story of his life, his teachings, and his activities was to be continued, because God had decided so. In Matthew's account of Easter morning, the writer draws a great word picture when he describes the angel of the Lord came and rolled back the stone from the tomb and then sat on it. Sat on it. That deserves an artist's painting of a picture expressive of how totally absurd it is for anyone to think that when we don't want to hear what God has to say or wants us to do, we can simply place a stone in God's way. It does not end here, is what God has to say. This is a story to be continued, is what God has to say. Thanks be to God that Christ's presence is not ended, that Christ's presence continues everywhere. We need Christ so much, and so does the world in general. If the life and presence and ongoing story of Christ were ended, I dare say we'd be terribly losing our way. There are so many ways that he saves our lives from being lost when we learn, listen, and follow him. Without Christ as an essential standard for how to live, how to love, how to forgive, how to serve, how to relate to others, and how to make moral, ethical decisions, we would become lost in a kind of darkness, in a vast ocean of relativity, in a vast ocean utterly confused by the many moral and spiritual dilemmas of our times. Ever hear the story of the schoolboy who asked the teacher, "Is it wrong to cheat?" His teacher then asked, "If you cheated, do you think you could live with yourself?" The boy decided not to cheat, but neither did he do very well on his next report card. At school, he said to his teacher, "I think it would be easier to cheat and to live with myself than not to cheat and live with my grandmother." That boy obviously had a problem. He needed help. He was lost in the shadowland of a confusing dilemma, and he needed a source of light to find his way out. Just look at the dilemmas there are in our world today. Look at the confusion of choices we have. Look at the ethical and moral uncertainties. Look at the good and bad uses of power. Look at the unfaithfulness in some relationships. Look at the lies that are told. Look at what some will do for political gain. Look at the misinformation and disinformation that is sown daily in the platforms of our social media. Look at the lures of wealth and popularity. Look at the confusion of motives behind human decisions and other important matters. I am so grateful that God does not leave us alone, but that the story of our lives with Christ is one that continues. Easter is our celebration. There is nothing the world can do to end the story. End of story. No, it's the beginning of a journey. Our risen Lord lives, and our relationship and discipleship with him continue. We need the work and life of Christ to continue. That is hope. We all need that source of light that is both wiser and brighter than our own by ourselves. If I fly in an airplane, which I don't do too often, I'm not a great flyer, but anyway, I want to know the pilot is tuned in on the homing beam of our destination, rather than following signs in the clouds or following the latest way the wind is blowing. Though going in whatever direction the popular wind is blowing seems to be the way of much of the world when Christ is ignored. If I want to live my life fulfilled, I want to know what God has to tell me. I want to know how to relate to God, how God relates to me, and how I should relate to others. Because I need a much brighter light than I can generate by myself in order to make right choices. I need to know Christ, who says he is the way, the truth, and the life. And because he lives, because his presence continues, I can know these things. We need a dependable, unchanging, uncompromising standard of measurement for things like what life is all about and the meaning of our relationships. What is right and what is good and what is ethical, what is true, what is loving, what is just and what is fair, and what is faithful to God. And the good news is we have that standard through a daily relationship with a risen Christ whose Spirit is with us now and everywhere and for always. We are not alone. One very real and concrete way this good news of Easter is published to the wider world is through the fellowship and work of the faithful church. Our mission being the same as His, our inspiration being Him, and the Spirit of our risen Lord, living Lord. Knowing the Spirit of the risen Christ at the head and center of our church and of our individual lives, we are a people of hope. Hope in the world, a people of faith, glad to know the mission and life of Christ continues. How? Through us, through our efforts. His mission is our mission. Remember where we began today, the story I didn't complete telling you? Roland Hayes, the lyric tenor. I'll be good and complete the story now. You'll remember it was his fourth encore as he slowly stepped to the podium and stood quietly, and the audience hushed to the slight bow of his head. Having heard well their chanting, their request that he sing Old Man River, he said, I shall now sing of a man far greater than I. And then with no accompaniment he began, Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. And then the other verses. Were you there when they nailed him to the cross? Were you there when they laid him in the tomb? My mother, who was in Cleveland when Mr. Hayes sang that evening, said there was no applause when he finished, no talking, just many eyes wet with tears. And Roland Hayes, without even a bow, lest he draw attention to himself, quietly turned and left the stage. He had redirected everyone's focus to be upon the awesome gift of Christ to each person there, where human hurt, human hunger are met by the healing power of God's love. My mother always referred to that experience as a profound breakthrough moment in her life as she realized that Jesus, who would give his life in that way for her sake, deserved also to be her Savior. And so the story I started with, I've now completed, but the story of our life and our work together as a church of our risen Lord is a story to be continued, and we know he's with us as we try. For Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. As a church, may the things we do show to others that it's true.